My concept of engagement uh, is that it has three dimensions: behavioral, cognitive, and affective. Cognitive engagement is when you're mentally wrestling with ideas. Affective engagement is when you're interested in ideas or you're enjoying what you're learning, or even if you're frustrated about something and it's making you look into it and study it further, that could be affective engagement. And then finally, behavioral. Behavioral engagement is in class when you're leaning forward and being attentive and listening, or out of school when you're looking for these ideas in your everyday experience intentionally. That would signify behavioral engagement. But these ideas are really broad. Affective could be interest, it could be positive emotions, could be negative emotions. Those types of affect are going to impact engagement in really different ways. And so I don't think it's fair to define engagement as just affective. Do we need to get at positive affective, negative affective, social affective? And then moving to cognitive engagement. What does it mean to be cognitive? Are you paying attention? Is that cognitive? Are you mentally wrestling with ideas? Is there a difference between shallow and deep cognitive engagement? And then finally, behavioral. Is it enough to shake your head and nod as if you're listening? Is that really behavioral engagement? Or do we want you moving around? Do we want you participating? Do we want you interacting with the environment? But to me, all of those things are engagement, but they're different forms. And so we really need to look at the mechanisms of behavioral, cognitive, and affective engagement to define these things better if we're going to study them and say that they are in fact engagement. The definition of engagement definitely changes by field. I know that some people see engagement as school involvement, as participation. I come from an educational psychology perspective, and we generally view engagement from a cognitive, affective standpoint. And so I like to think of those differences as grain size differences. And so this big idea of attendance or involvement in school, that's at a much larger level, a bigger grain size, than looking at individual cognitive experiences is at a much smaller grain size. And some people will take that even further. And so they'll do eye trackers. Where are you following on a screen when you're looking at content? That would be even a much smaller grain size yet. In most of my work, I use self-report instruments. I just recently created a STEM conceptual change cognitive engagement instrument. And so what types of engagement occur when you're moving from an inaccurate science idea to a more scientifically accepted science idea, and how are you mentally wrestling with those ideas? And that has some limitations because you're getting self-report. With that comes social desirability bias, and by that I mean people respond in a way that they think the survey administrator would like them to respond, and that's a big problem with self-report instruments. And so to approach those challenges, I've recently moved to experience sampling methodology. And so I try to survey participants while they're in the moment of learning. And in that case, it seems to be more reliable data because rather than reflecting on an engagement experience they had months ago, they can instead reflect on an experience that they're having right at that moment. And then finally, I have began moving to video recording learning sessions, and we can try to observe engagement as it's happening. The problem with that is it's the person who's watching the video and coding it for engagement. They're the person that is in their mind viewing engagement. We don't know that the student is actually experiencing it. And so In my research, I try to do multiple methods, collecting surveys, doing some observations, maybe even doing some interviews, and seeing if all of those types of assessment methodologies line up. And if they do, then you can be more sure that they did, in fact, experience engagement. One idea that I think is really cool and new to the field with regard to engagement is this idea of uh, transformative experience. And so, do you have engagement in your everyday life that changes the way you see an experience in your everyday life? And so, let's imagine a student or a child is in their backyard or they're at the park playing, and they look at a tree, and they, instead of seeing a tree and leaves and sticks and bark, they see photosynthesis, they see chemical reactions. And uh, this would be changing the way they see the tree. They don't just see a tree anymore, they see chemical reactions and process. They're viewing science, seeing the world through the eyes of a scientist. And so, in what ways can we develop instruction to generate these more transformative types of engagement experiences that are going to change the way students see and interact with the world?